Hey, fellow GNTers, those of us who like our spirituality with a twist. So we are in the midst of 2025, and we're doing our What the Hell is Going On in America series, which has been like us trying to explore different ways of just trying to make sense of what's going on in the world. Uh, the What the Hell America series, and again, just trying to give different perspectives and different ideas on what the hell. And so what we decided to do, this gave us an opportunity to discuss a little thing from the famous psychologist, or at least semi-famous psychologist, Wilhelm Reich, and his notion of the emotional plague. And with this episode, we're going to get back to something we promised to do, which was also introduce some of our own expertise into the discussion of this concept of the emotional plague, EP, um, in kind of what I think is kind of a unique way. But a little context, I always think it's nice to talk about this emotional plague idea just a little bit before we get into the full of it. So we'll talk a
Well,
little
what? But
emotional
what?
plague. We'll talk a little bit about, I'm doing it.
Okay, okay. Well,
We'll
you
talk
mentioned
about a
art.
little about traditional Chinese medicine and how it relates to this
Yes.
emotional plague,
Okay.
especially body-mind connection. All right.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
First, though, if you could do the thing that everyone asks you to do with every podcast, like, subscribe, share, write a review if you can. It helps everybody out, as everyone keeps saying over and over again. So if you can do that for us, that would be appreciated. Labor of love for us, really trying to spread like useful stuff, educational podcast, trying to spread useful things and try to make sense out of this fuckadoodle world. So,
Mm.
um, emotional plague. So the basic idea is that I think there's like two big ideas that we'll be hitting on in this one for it. One is the concept that there are just toxic sociocultural ideas that get transmitted within a society, kind of like a contagion. People pass it around to one another and you can get kind of infected with it. And the other big idea of this is that this can be not only a thing that's psychological, Reich being, psychologist person, but also has its physical side too. That these two sides kind of mirror each other. And that's going to give us a chance to talk about the traditional Chinese medical side of this. Now, what I always find really interesting about this, Daniel, to me, is that from a certain tantric point of view or Taoist point of view, there's always sort of an emotional play going on. The toxic parts of the cultures in which a person lives that will kind of hold individual people back, the sort of toxic sociocultural ideas. I am a big proponent of that notion, and that's always going on all the time, and people have to transcend those things. That's true on an individual level, but then at other times, the plague goes truly acute and crazy. We've been talking about this a little bit over the last couple of episodes with this, and all of a sudden you get real flaring of like massive toxicity. Wilhelm Reich, for his part, wrote a book called The Mass Psychology of Fascism, trying to describe these things blowing up, in his time in places like Germany and Italy. And, we're going through something like one of those times. So this is our G&T way of trying to talk about these ideas. Anything you want to add to that before we get to the TCM side of things?
No, we're good.
Okay. The TCM thing hit me personally on retreat, my last big retreat I did, where I just started thinking, Americans are like physically unhealthy as well as psychologically unhealthy. And as
Well,
I,
Eric, and just
yeah,
before you go, yeah, TCM, just because our audience is
traditional,
almost done.
I think I thought I said it, but maybe if I didn't, traditional Chinese medicine. So that's
Yes.
Daniel and I's day jobs. We work as acupuncturists and herbalists in the traditional Chinese medical world, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things we try to bring into these podcasts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that medical take on things mixed up with the psychology and the spirituality. We don't do as much of the traditional Chinese medical stuff, but this is one where we're really going to talk about those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, this notion of, uh, again, what hit me was just thinking about, that connection that Reich makes between the body and the mind, right? And when one or the other side is in the thrall of the emotional plague, or there's things going wrong with it, even if you don't want to use that language, uh, when you have psychological problems, you're going to have corresponding physical problems, and they're going to mirror each other. So that got to the idea of thinking from a TCM point of view, certainly true. And we'll try to explore that with y'all. And then the other thing that's kind of interesting when you look at the psychology of traditional Chinese medicine is you can get, when you have this problem of like the physical and the emotional being affected in this combined way, you're going to get certain negative emotional states that are going to come up a lot more easily. And then you're also going to lose access to like certain virtues. I think they would, we call
Hmm.
them in the Taoist world, that would more naturally be there for you, and you'd have an ability to express yourself, to express those, and yeah, that struck me as really fascinating to try to talk about. So that's where we're at with this, right? Anything more on that, Daniel, before we dive in
Mm-mm.
system by system? It's not
Hmm.
something that people talk about all the time, but I think it's this is a rare G&T special because most people don't talk this way. So this is going to
Hmm.
be our own jam, trying to give some help with this. So I think the one that struck me as the first one to talk about was the one that kind of inspired this in me. Curious to hear your opinion about this too, which would be Chinese medicine talks about the digestive system and its relationship to, on the negative side, states of like worry and mental anxiety and rumination. And then on the positive side, being cut off from states that are more compassionate.
Yeah, more like giving, you know,
I mean,
like,
I mean, maybe you have a different way of thinking of those virtues. I just use the word compassion. You got another way of talking about that?
yeah, I think like think of it like I guess in like the esoteric or kind of hippie sense, like Mother Earth giving, producing fruits and vegetables. It would be as
Mhm.
if the earth no longer wanted to give as much. The crops were not as bountiful as years past, or something like this, or grandma's not feeling well, so she's not making her, you know, dish that everybody loves to eat at
Yeah,
grandma's house.
the favorite sweet potato salad or something. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So this is kind of like the poetry of this in Chinese medical culture. They'll talk about like the digestive system, but then they'll usually use some kind of poetry imagery for this. So the imagery for the digestive system comes from the earth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the earth is
Mm-hmm.
trash. You don't get the natural bounty of the earth, if you want to speak kind
Mm.
of poetical in that way, right? Yeah.
And even if and there's always a balance of opposites in TCM and Taoism just in general. And like on one hand, the digestive system is in charge of like rotting, decomposing, you know, and the opposite of decomposing is starting from nothing and coming to life.
Hmm.
And so in this way, like if you think of composting is one way, but planting a seed in the earth is the opposite to that.
You need both sides of those things in order to grow the seed or something like that. Yeah.
Correct.
But this idea of nourishment, right?
Hmm.
So when you get to like the clinical side of this, just from our like medical perspective, how many Americans have like really lousy GI tracts, shitty GI tracts? Tons and tons and tons. And that's what hit me in the retreat. I was thinking about that and I was going, okay. Well, on the negative side, we're used to people being just like full of all these mental anxieties and worries and ruminations,
Hmm.
like that's just
Hmm.
so prevalent in the culture. And we can talk about it from that point of view, which we'll keep fleshing this one out.
Yeah.
But from the other side, like there's just a distinct lack of compassion in the culture. It's like shocking,
Yes.
right? I wrote these notes weeks ago, my side of these notes, and that was before the murder of one Charlie Kirk. But it's no doubt like you could see it from that side, and I did jot these in the notes because I was trying to think about all the different ways that people talk about this. And in that sort of like Christian nationalist worldview, that side of the culture, they have this idea of like toxic empathy and compassion, that actually showing empathy and compassion is toxic. And yet they're Christians, which is a hard thing to get one's mind around. That seems quite strange, right? That you have a bunch of Christian people
Hmm.
saying that empathy and compassion is toxic. That doesn't really like match with the Jesus that I grew up with, but okay. So they have that side going on, right? And, part of their way of talking about this, is like being soft deprives the sinners of getting forced into non-sinning behavior.
Mm.
So if you're harsher with people, you kind of force them to do what in these people's minds would be the right thing. So there's a rationalization behind it, which I guess is a way of like talking yourself into something. using the energies of the earth to rationalize something out. Uh, but in any case, that whole idea, are you familiar with that thing in that subculture of like toxic empathy? I've been doing more research into the Christian nationalist thing. I've been trying to do that for the pod, so you don't have to. I've been
Mm,
doing it. So I've been listening to a lot of people who were in that sort of Christian nationalist cult. We've been talking about cults a
mm,
lot. That
mm-hmm,
side of like, I don't have a problem calling it toxic Christianity, toxic American Christianity. And so maybe for future episodes, but I've been listening to people who are like, yeah, I was in that and I got out. And they have these terms that they use. So I've been listening to like one of the people I've been trying to use as a source for this for our little episode is a woman named April Joy, and she wrote this book called Star Spangled Jesus. And in one of the chapters, this whole thing comes up, and I'd heard it before, but she really went through it. You're going, okay, yeah, there's like this whole school of thought there that you say empathy is toxic. And again, I started thinking, okay, like why would that idea even occur to you, or why would that catch on? And I started saying, okay, well, these people like are, like throughout American culture, there's this whole problem of the GI tract being crappy and then just not being able to have the natural connection to these more virtuous states, that will more
mm-hmm,
spontaneously appear when these systems are more healthy. You'll just naturally be able to find yourself more in that headspace. So I was looking at it from that side, right? But I mean, I don't want to even I'm not a both sides in person. I keep saying, like, I think there's a real problem with Trumpism and MAGA and Christian nationalism. I think those are all toxic things, but I can't say it's like only a one side thing also,
it's not.
because there's like toxicity across the culture overall on this point. And I remember listening to something a couple of years ago, um, and just, the change in how people think. It was like NPR thing, National Public Radio, now whacked by the Trump administration. Gone. Fuck them. But the idea that they were doing this thing and they were just talking about it's so hard. Like there's almost a virtue now of not forgiving people or something like that. There's a
Mm-hmm,
hardness in people. And the thing they were showing was some guy who was obviously an asshole. He was a very controlling, sort of almost like incel type person who had all kinds of toxicity about how he thought about relationships and women, and eventually got into a relationship with this woman after being an involuntary celibate in incel. And then the relationship ended up breaking up, and he kind of turned on her and was really mean to her. And as he grew up as a person, he started saying, I was wrong. And he started going, he grew and realized that what he had done was bad. So it was sort of a weird episode. It was the producer of the show who wanted to talk about this as being something that showed progress and improvement, and we should have compassion for this person because they used to be kind of an asshole and now they progress forward. And she was talking with her co-producer on the show as they were playing the episode. And the co-producer just said, no, I'm not going to show compassion for this person or empathy. No. And the producer of the show just realized, like, wow, man, there's really a hardness in the culture now.
mm-hmm,
People are really hard. And so they decided to do the episode of the show just on like that issue. And they were kind of
mm,
debating back and forth, like, is it right to show compassion and empathy to people or not? And the one co-producer's position was no. And probably if you did it politically, she was more on the left side of the aisle rather than the right. But
mm-hmm.
anyways, it's like it's a ubiquitous problem.
Yeah, I think so. Especially as we move along, and there's more and more animosity. There is no real middle. That's why it's hard to do both sides of them unless it's pretty blatant in general. There's certain because even though we're playing, it seems from like opposite sides of the spectrum, there is a spectrum, and that spectrum is still held within society, still held within culture. You know what I'm saying? Like generally speaking, nobody on the left or the right is advocating for helping out feeding hungry children with people's house cats. You know what I'm saying? Like no, like this would be this would be really a progressive idea, right? You know what I'm saying? Like that's a really this is far out.
She's saying that they're
People,
not willing to sacrifice the house cats to
yeah,
feed their
because it's
brethren.
right, right. Well, because I'm just saying, like it's there's still we're still playing within a spectrum of conservative, progressive. We're still playing within this generalized spectrum. Now, one side, whatever. You go more extreme over here. You go more extreme over here. You're just moving closer to the ends of this same pole. But that pole is held within society as it is currently. And there's not a whole lot of things that come up that are outside of this spectrum. So it just when things come up, they do ricochet. Certain things come up because people's psychology, even though their choices are different and how they think are different, the I don't know what you want to call them, archetypes or tendencies that we have, we've talked about this many times, are still similar because people are 99 point, what did 23 me say? 99.6% identical all across the board, you know? So like for every purple haired hemp necklace wearing, whatever college person people like to
Stereotype, yeah.
objectify. Yeah, stereotype. There's the same like American flag flannel button down wearing cowboy hat, pickup driver, pickup truck person. On the other, like they're stereotypes of things that you've seen, but their minds are operating in a very similar way. It seems like they're different from the outside because of what they choose to affiliate themselves with, what enrages them, what turns them on, yada yada. But the way in which they get to those decisions, the rationale is going to look pretty similar. It really is. People are not that different. They're not. So the question is how do you find ways to unify people, but then how do you find and what we're doing is trying to find what are the similarities, what are this or what we're calling basically is the plague, the illnesses that are affecting people to take away essentially this particular thing right here, compassion and empathy. Because without compassion and empathy, you could do anything to anyone without feeling guilty about it. But I'll tell you one thing for damn sure, anybody who's seen trauma knows when somebody wants compassion, there's nothing else that they would give up anything for assistance at that moment. And having coldness is very easy to do because we people live a fake life via social media and in large groups of the people who believe similarly to them. But when you see somebody in person, much more difficult, almost impossible. You got to be a real like for real sick, to not want to lend a helping hand to somebody who is in real need. There's something wrong with that person. And I don't say that very lightly because I think that somebody say, oh, this person is sick, or they're whatever on the spectrum or some kind of shit. I don't use that kind of terminology very regularly, but you are fucked up if you can walk by or step over somebody who is in real need and not have it bother you and you just let that shit go. To me, those are the sickest people in society. Those are more sick than the people who are hearing voices in their head because this motherfucker's hearing a real voice that says, fuck that person, keep going. This person injured, this person starving, this person needs assistance, and I don't give a fuck. Well, you know who needs assistance? The person who's walking away. You know what I mean? To me, that's the real plague. It's the one who's put together and looks shiny on the outside, but on the inside is absolutely rotten, you know?
Mhm. All, all I can really say about it is when I was listening to this thing where it's these two adult people debating whether or not someone who seems to be apologetic and really wants to change and go forward. I mean, that was the
Mm,
NPR thing. And
mm,
having debating whether someone who is apologetic and wants to change, the way I heard the episode, and their discussion of this and this changing of understanding of what is empathy and compassion for people, them debating whether that should even be a thing that you would show empathy, forgiveness, and compassion for someone who seems to be sincerely wanting to change. And whether that's right or wrong is bizarre to me. And it struck me. And I've actually, obviously, I've had that in my head since then, thinking, so what's happening? Because as a psychological person, right, like one of the cornerstones of psychology is to show understanding, empathy, and honesty. Those are like the three cornerstones that you have, going back to one of our favorite psychologists, Carl Rogers. And I was like,
Or
wow,
Rogers, yeah.
they're knocking the empathy leg right off the table. And the two-legged table doesn't stand.
Does not stand.
So I was like, okay, this is shocking on some level to me that this would be like a debate, you know? And the one person was really vehement of like, no, people shouldn't be forgiven, even if they're truly, showing a true desire to, apologize and change. And I was like, okay, that was shocking to me. But then as I go forward, and I'm not, we can both handle these things both in our own ways. I'm not a both sides person. This fucking Trumpism, this shit's dangerous. This is some dangerous fucking shit. Trump, MAGA, that shit's dangerous. So I'm not like gonna mince words on that. Yeah, at the same time, I could recognize that, throughout the culture, based on what we're talking about, there's a real problem of like what would be this TCM thing. If you're going to have people who have bad digestive systems, they're going to ruminate and they're going to worry and they're going to overthink in a Reichian sense, right? Looking at the body and the
Mm-hmm.
mind. And then there's also going to be problems of like generating compassion. It just won't
Mm-hmm.
happen. And that's Taoism, right? That's
Yes.
the Taoist aspect of Chinese medicine. It's just not going to happen. So, anyways,
I
I
was
find it to be kind of I mean, it was an epiphanous thing for me. And then I'll tell you real quick, sorry, Daniel, I don't want to cut you off, but
You're good.
I
You're
was
good.
presenting this idea to a group of like traditional Chinese medical students. I teach, as part of our gigs, right, for people who maybe haven't listened to us before. And so I was, presenting this to some students who are a little bit more advanced in one of the traditional Chinese medicine programs where I teach. And one of the women, like you could see it really hit her. And she said, that's true. That's really true. The digestive symptoms are bad. And then people are lacking these fundamental virtues that Taoism says should naturally be there, being if you're operating
Mm-hmm.
from a healthy state. So, and it was one of those nice moments as a teacher, you know what I mean? Where you could see it really click for the person. And she just kind of blurted out in the class, that's true. And I was like, Eureka. Anyways, I just wanted to
Mm-hmm.
share that real quick. Okay, sorry about
Yeah.
that.
No, you're good. So I was at the Baha'i temple, which
Hmm.
is like, the Baha'i faith is I don't know, kind of like a Unitarian sort of faith, blended of a number of different faiths. And there's a number of these Baha'i temples around the world. They're very beautiful. There happens to be one just outside of Chicago in a suburb called Wilmette.
Hmm.
And and anybody can go there. Not at any time, they have some services, but anybody could walk in pretty much whenever they're open and don't have services. And it's just silence. It's a very beautiful building, super high ceilings, very ornate drawings, very kind of spiritual statements written along the wall, but it's a very serene, quiet place. And the grounds around the building are very pretty. It's right across from the water, beaches across the street. So it's a nice place to go. And I was sitting there, and I won't go into the entire meditation that I had, but I was thinking about blood sacrifice and how that was so prevalent in so many religions. And very likely one day they stopped.
Mm.
And the day that they stopped, they would say, how could people do that? Even though they had just done one, probably the day before or the week before that. It's like those barbarians, they can't do that anymore. My God. They were like, sir, you did one yet yesterday, but we won't talk about that anymore. No, and so it hit me. I was like, wait a minute. I can put myself in the position. I tried to put myself in the position of, okay, what would it be like to give, to sacrifice, to say the life that is on this earth, I'm going to release it back into to be absorbed back to the ether and do this as an act of reverence for whatever it is that I am carrying around. I'm going to take this thing. And I was like, okay, so I understand that as an act of reverence for the divine, as an act of, worship, if you will. I said, okay, is there anything that we could do that would be more divine than that? I'm like, well, yes, the total fucking opposite, which is to save lives and to help.
Mm.
And again, you have one of those epiphanous moments. And this, to me, that's certainly not some kind of like wild revelation straight from the right hand of God to my mind. And yet it just was like, to me in my brain, it just shits on anything and anyone who says otherwise. It's not, you don't need rationality. What's more close to the thing that gives life? protecting the life that was given, saving the lives that are already here. So then I think about people who, again, to your point, are doing the opposite of this, many of which are twisting religion all over the world, numerous religions. Fuck this culture. This is in many cultures, you know? I'm like, it is literally the opposite of the teaching. Forget what teaching it is. It's the opposite because all of them have, not all of them, but the majority of them are monotheistic and they are honoring the God they think that gave them their breath and the breath of everything else. How is honoring that idea, that being, if you will, by taking and making, creating misery and helping to aid in the discomfort and suffering of other beings? To me, it's insane. Now, maybe I'm
Hmm.
crazy. I could certainly say it. Yeah, you know, whatever. But to me, it that nothing makes more in my mind, literally nothing makes more sense than that. Nothing makes more sense than that. You want to help your parents out, so you're an older brother, you watch your younger brother or your younger sister while they come home from work. When they're gone for work, you don't kill your younger brother or younger sister, then say, "Ha, I'm the best sibling ever. You know, I'm the one that should be praised. Praise. I, mom, I know you're stressed out today. Don't worry about baby Jenny. I put a plastic bag over her head, took her out. She's out. So you're good now. Don't worry about it." No, your mother would be upset. And for those who love to amorphize God, what, you think he's happy or she's happy? Or better
Yeah,
yet, they're happy? You know, like,
yeah.
no, it's fucking crazy, dude. It's crazy.
So the thing that's like I think striking about you're talking about it in the Baha'i Temple, what hits me is there's something it's powerful in its like transparency. It's powerful in its like clarity. I don't want to say obviousness because it like that makes it seem like it's not important or something, but it's almost the obviousness of it that gives it its power. It's like, well, of course, you know,
Yeah.
approaching the world from a position of like, let's go through and like give and you know, as Reich was talking about himself, to more naturally love other people, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's an act of like wanting to do those earthy things, giving, compassion, and so on, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And like when I was listening to you talk, the thing that hits me is I think with the again, this is a Taoist thing, you know, Taoism and Chinese culture and Chinese medicine are kind of like entwined, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But like it's the naturalness of it that has a power too, that goes along with the idea of the clarity, transparency, and obviousness of something like that, you know, which
Mm-hmm.
makes it powerful. Like just naturally, shouldn't be that be the thing you would do, right? Which raises an interesting question of like, if you want to get really Taoist and traditional, really Chinese medicine, like, why isn't that happening? Right? Why
Mm.
isn't that obvious expression of that, you know, that virtue that can naturally appear when things are good? It's not happening, right?
Mm-mm.
And you're like, okay, well, part of Chinese medical theory would be beyond whatever might be the psychological things that are holding people back, would be like the physical system isn't working right. So those natural states aren't going to come out, right? So yeah, because there's a there's an obvious naturalness to it. So
Mm-hmm.
maybe one of the things we can do, you know, we're going to do like different systems in different episodes, but maybe it'd be good that we talk through a little bit of like what makes this system so bad. Like, what are the ideologies that burn it out, just to give people some things to think about.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So I wanted to point out that like a lot of, you know, usually in Chinese medicine, you'll say things get damaged by negative emotional states. So it's kind of a two-way street. If the system gets damaged, those emotions will appear, more of those negative emotional psychological states will appear. But on the other hand, those negative psychological states can be damaging. And this is sort of this idea of like the constant ruminating and overthinking damaging this system, right? And like weighing it down and exhausting it. I think the metaphor for this is the same energy that the system uses to process things that you take in, food and drink, is the same energies that are used to sort of process your thoughts. And sometimes we talk about
Mm.
the idea that like I need to digest that idea. We use that even in English, right? So
Yeah.
okay, give me a
Food for
chance, food
thought.
for thought. Give me a chance to digest that a little bit more.
Mm,
So that's what we're
mm-hmm.
talking about. So if you look at like the culture, there's obviously an ideological factor, a cause of a problem medically. right? By people constantly ruminating and constantly, in these like doom spirals of like negative thinking that's going on all the time, right? You agree with that? I'm sure you got a take on that you want to share too.
What's standing out for me? So for people who, don't know, um, there's all these like acupuncture points all over the body, meridians, however you wouldn't want to call lines, what do you want to call it? Like fiber optic lines all over, you know?
Mhm.
And there's a beginning and ending point for everything. And so we're talking about, like this stomach and digestion kind of thing. Eric, you know the answer to this, but audience, without Googling it or using ChatGPT, does anybody know where the first point on the stomach is? Where's stomach one, the first point on the stomach channel?
People are just going to be
It,
Googling.
right, yeah. Well, don't look it up, but it's right by your eyes
Mhm.
because this is the first place that we're digesting is with our eyes. We see everything first. Of course, if you're blind, different story. But
Mhm.
for most, normal functioning people, this is where we break things down first, is visually, because we'll often see it before we hear it or whatever the case is. So, yeah, what you're saying is true in that like what we show ourselves. You talk about doom spiral. When you think doom spiral, I think doom scroll.
I was also going that way too. So both of those things are kind of entwined,
Yeah,
right? The doom scrolling
and
and spiraling.
what do you do is you're looking at shit basically. And so what
Mhm.
are you digesting? You're trying to find nourishment at the dumpster essentially. You're not going to find nourishment at the dumpster. You're going to find nourishment at the buffet or something like this. So it just depends on like what are you putting in front of yourself, because it's affecting the way in which you take things in, because you have to break everything down. Even if you feel like you're letting it go or whatever, it still has to go through the process of being processed.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Hmm. So there's like yeah, the way that you take in information. I guess people are also doing like tons and tons of more mental work too
Mm-hmm.
within the context of that as well. All right, so we got that one. One of the other parts is infectious disease, or what in
Mm-hmm.
Chinese medicine they call external invasions. So in a lot of the old Chinese classic text, they'll make this observation that even if the illness doesn't immediately affect the digestive system, part of the digestive system's role is to kind of build up the resources that support immunity, right? And those are the kind of things that protect the lung from things like respiratory infections and all that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And so maybe not even, sometimes we get sick with like a stomach flu, nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, those things. That happens to people. But even when that's not the main system immediately being affected, it can also can happen kind of indirectly when there's other kinds of infectious disease problems, and that will kind of exhaust the earth too. And maybe in that sense, it's not an accident that like a lot of this stuff is happening in the aftermath of like a COVID, right? I think one of the things I
Mm-hmm.
didn't get when I was looking and saying, how bad is this?
Eric, actually, that's
Yeah.
that's a low key like high end observation
Oh, yeah,
right
there's
there.
something in that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I hope people caught that. I don't know if they did, but I definitely did.
Yeah. In the
That's a
aftermath
good
of
observation.
you get a pandemic that runs through and people are depleted,
Mm-hmm. That
right?
you begin to tap into the first layer of reserves, which is in the digestive system. Again, in Chinese medicine.
Yeah. And so, respiratory infections and those things, eventually Chinese medical theory will damage the GI tract, especially you get them over
Mm-hmm.
and over again. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
it's another reason why oh, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
No, no, for people who are thinking this is like allergies, food allergies,
Happens too.
or you can think like or like leaky gut, because you take
Mhm.
something into your system, it gets into your bloodstream, then you have an allergy to it. We have allergies basically almost exclusively through, of course, pollen and everything else, but like in your digestive system, there's far more allergies to food than there is, major allergies. It always comes through your digestive tract, and when you want to work on allergies, you have to work through your diet. You have to work through your eating most often.
Well, I mean, you look at it like how many fucking people have food allergies now?
Crazy.
So, the whole system isn't working the way it's supposed to. And if you get the neo-Reichian thing in your mind, you're like, well, then you can't. Reich's point is like when you're in a healthy space, physically and psychologically, you can more naturally show love, seeking knowledge, and creative activity. He's tying those two things together. We're doing something similar, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're in a good
Mm-hmm.
headspace. The system is working right. More naturally can we have compassion. More naturally can we overcome these things. So if everybody has
Mm-hmm.
food allergies and everything is trashed, you know, and maybe it's not like in that sense we were talking earlier. Maybe it's not in that sense that these things are happening in the aftermath of a pandemic. No, we could say one of the things I think I underestimated was like, and I wasn't purposely trying to underestimate it. I just didn't realize the full magnitude. When I would talk with people about how dark are the politics going to get, in like a Trump 2.0, I was like, well, I don't know, it should be a survivable thing, fingers crossed, right? But, the pandemic was psychologically shocking for people. I don't think I fully got the strength of the psychological shock of that. So maybe that was something I
Mm-hmm.
underestimated. But the other side of it is, like we're getting through for our episode here, that if the system is physically damaged, Taoist philosophy, you can't project those positive qualities. I think that's important, right?
Mm-hmm.
That speaks to you too. We're in the same headspace with
Mm-hmm.
that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm. You got more on that one before I talk about diet?
No, I think basically just briefly this when you say the system for people
Mhm.
who are still with us, and congratulations if you are, because you're getting a far deeper perspective on society than you're going to find on some fucking comedians podcast. But no shots fired here, just gentle flares shot in the air. Um, the system is the uh, is the is the entirety of the culture. So when we're talking individually, but then we're talking culturally. We're talking the culture as a basically just imagine like a larger person, and each of us are a little person in this person. It's a holograph.
Oh yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
you know what I'm saying? So like the culture's digestive system has been interrupted by the phenomenon of COVID, and
Hmm.
therefore the culture's sensitivity for compassion is decreased because the culture's ability to digest has been so shocked. And now we're living in a post shocked culture whose ability to digest and therefore their ability to have compassion is decreased because of what happened. And that then gets shared by everybody else who makes up that culture. So it's gross and individual simultaneously. I just wanted to make that point.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a physical plague, a pandemic, and now there's the subsequent flaring of an emotional plague,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah. Um, well, I think there's like two other ones that are kind of good just to share with people because we can all look at our own health. We can do it kind of quickly, but obviously the
Yeah.
American diet is very, very bad, right? Very, very
Mm-hmm.
bad. And that's kind of bad across multiple ways. So I think if you're thinking about this from like a personal psycho-spiritual point of view, you can do things to like clean up the diet and then see whether or not you're just going to feel better, right?
Mm-hmm.
But then, Taoist medical theory would be you'll more naturally get into some of these more positive mental states, right?
Yeah.
And usually with students, I say, well, part of this is quantity. Probably people eat too much. So 1Q, quality is poor, right? And it's hard, and we all can have compassion on this too, in the sense that, like,
Yeah. Yeah.
money, it's hard to buy those more expensive foods that are a little bit better,
It's
so
hard to buy even cheaper foods now. You know what I'm saying?
yeah. I mean, like I heard the other day, I think it was the people of McDonald's saying that a lot of Americans are just like skipping meals, so their early morning McMuffin scale sales are going down.
Oh, well,
And
yeah,
their
like
interpretation is like people are too poor to afford breakfast, so they just skip it.
Starbucks is closing many locations. They got rid of like 900 workers at their corporate office because
Oh,
people
wow.
are they're doing this thing exactly right here. They're saying, well, most people live paycheck to paycheck, so it's like, okay, do I need to spend 10, $11 on a cup of coffee every day? That adds
Mhm.
up very quickly, 5 days a week, you know,
Mhm.
250 bucks a month, 200 bucks a month. That's an easy one.
I hadn't heard that about the Starbucks thing. I mean, that's
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
Mhm. I mean, since you bring that up, you can talk about quality of diet. The coffee thing, not good for the GI tract either, ultimately, either, right? Irritates the stomach, purges the
Hmm.
bowels, Chinese medical thought, right? And just true, right? So that part of, how we self-medicate, right,
Hmm.
does damage in different ways. I don't know. We're not gonna do all, you could talk for an hour on
Oh,
coffee easy. But anyways, those are negative sides of that. Um, I usually try to point out that the diet is sort of like imbalanced. You don't like have really proper distribution of things. Chinese medicine has its own philosophy of how you distribute those foods, but you know, most of us can like, or a lot of us can look at our diets. Most of us, a lot of us, look at our diets and go, ah, shit, man, this could be better arranged, right? So that's something to work on too. Um, and then, some of the people in the Chinese medical world will talk about like all the weird, erratic scheduling we have around dietary things in America, right? We're kind of all over the place. And I know that's true for me too. The whole Chinese medical theory is that the justice system wants regularity.
Hmm.
And I mean, I'm honest about this too. My dietary schedule is like all over the place. I don't live the life of a nice Mediterranean person. Italians who time out, this is my time to eat. Everything
Hmm.
shuts down. I'm making my food. That's, some Italians, they look at us like we're crazy. What the fuck are you doing? This is the time you shut down. It's noon, time out. We all eat.
Yeah.
No, we don't.
Take it easy, guys.
It's a protein bar over here, and then you like run for a while, and then another day, you don't eat it all. And I am all over the fucking place with this too, to be honest. So, anyways, scheduling, eating too fast, eating while involved in like mental work, all considered no bueno. These are all factors. And
Hmm.
you can trace this back to what you were bringing up earlier, Daniel, with leaky butt and the mic leaky butt. That's also happens too. Freudian slip, leaky gut, which is like damage to the GI tract, right?
Hmm.
And the real popular way of talking about this now is to talk about the microbiome, right? The damage to the intestinal flora. So all this is screwed up. And the one last thing you'd mentioned with this one is probably what we fancy talk call iatrogenesis medications that damage the GI tract, especially things like antibiotics. So, anyways, there's your
Hmm.
list of things to look at. Like, how do we get to this place? Well, all of this is fucked up. The GI tracts are damaged. Think about it for yourself. But what you can get is like a lot of people who are going to be really worried and mentally ruminating because those more toxic negative states are going to be there as part of the emotional plague. Like what you were saying, Daniel, everyone in the culture is doing it, and every individual, the culture overall, and then it seeps out and everyone's doing it. It's like you can diagnose it as like a public health problem, right? And then the lack of compassion. Yeah. And like this is a weird closer, but I was listening to a couple of these, people who got out of this Christian nationalist cult, April LaJoy, Star Spangled Jesus, and I can't remember the name of her partner when they do their podcast, Tim something. They do a thing called the New Evangelicals, and their idea is like, we want to teach people about Christian nationalism. So I was driving back into the city from Chicago proper from one of my teaching gigs, and I was listening to their episode talking about the funeral of one Charlie Kirk, and it was Charlie Kirk's wife, and she very gave this. I thought it was moving. She said basically, I'm trying to forgive the person who shot my husband, and I was like, wow, this is moving. And maybe some people don't like them for political reasons. I don't like their politics either, but I was like, I thought it was powerful actually. I was driving in the car and well, that's deep, and it was all about forgiveness and, the aspect of Christianity. And I bought it. I thought that was real, uh, you can watch it for yourself and see what you think. And then they also played one Stephen Miller, and like it was like listening to like a Joseph Goebbels Nazi propaganda speech. It was so bizarre and full of so much vitriol and toxicity. And I was like, there's the contrast right there, to my mind. The one
Hmm.
person doing her best under horrific circumstances. I didn't like Charlie Kirk's politics, but doesn't deserve to be shot. And you feel compassion for the people who are the victims of violence, political or otherwise. And I thought, I mean, I was a little bit teary listening to her talk about it because like, oh, you have to really try to do that. It didn't seem
Hmm.
fake to me, you know,
Hmm.
or
Hmm.
performative. I thought, there was aspects that were performative of the whole show. I mean, obviously it's a show, it looked like some parts looked like a WWE event or something with fireworks and all this bullshit propaganda, but I thought that seemed sincere to me. And I was like, that's pretty powerful. And that's Christianity at its finest, I suppose, right? And spirituality coming from a good place. And then this fucking vitriolic motherfucker, just like spewing all this hateful toxicity. And I was like, okay, there's a contrast. So I know if you
Hmm.
want to check it out for yourself, you can like compare and contrast. there's a person doing her best to try to be a Christian and, you know, doing something that's very difficult, that kind of forgiveness,
Mm-hmm.
obviously painful and difficult. And then this toxic emotional plague, political propagandist figure, and maybe one of the most powerful people in the country, and one of the most therefore powerful people in the world, just spewing hatred. It's
Yeah.
really, really striking. So maybe check it out for yourself and see what you think, and we'll give like a true study and contrast. That's all I got.
Well, I'm happy that we can agree that people dying is bad.
I think we should all be able to go, yeah, you can have some compassion for someone
Should
who
be
was
able to do
killed,
that.
you know,
Hmm.
and violence of any type.
That's correct.
And that it's moving when someone does their best to try to forgive the perpetrator of those actions
Hmm.
and makes that public statement. At least that was the part that I saw. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the
Yeah.
part that probably that's probably maybe the part worth watching the most.
And maybe the rest you could just delete,
Exactly. All right, brother.
pre-delete. Yeah.
Thank you so much
Mhm.
for rocking, audience. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for listening. Send us an email, ginandtantra@gmail.com. Hop on the podcast on the Instagram, the Gin and Tantra podcast. Leave a comment, subscribe, whatever. Don't do your thing. Thanks for listening. Uh, for Eric, this is Daniel. We'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.